When most people think of the civil rights movement, and this lecture is focused on the civil rights movement in the 20th century, when most people think of the civil rights movement, often they associate that movement with cases like Brown versus Board of Education in the 1950s, and with such important figures as Martin Luther King Jr. As often is the case, that sort of simple notion of what the civil rights movement was, what it was about, contradicts something that's very complex. If we think alone about the 1950s, for instance, consider that the 1950s represented what appeared to be an era of considerable affluence, post-war affluence. John Kenneth Galbraith wrote in 1958, The Affluent Society, and projected that the United States had the capacity to continue to develop and progress, and that ultimately it was possible to consider this growth of affluence to mean a gradual end to poverty. This new society that was being created would end poverty, certainly reduce it. But as is often the case historically, this notion of an affluent America, while it's not unreal, or wasn't unreal, also isn't the whole story. I want to give you a quick example. I teach in East Tennessee, and that's in the larger sort of region known as Appalachia. In central Appalachia in the 1950s, thousands upon thousands of coal miners were experiencing not affluence, but forces that were leading toward poverty and really pushing these Appalachian miners and their families out of the region to look for work. In the midst of affluence, in the wake of the Second World War, they were being pushed from deep mining jobs, being replaced by machines. And by the 1960s, really by the late 50s, but into the 60s, increasingly the deep mining was being replaced by surface mining. The result for those miners who stayed, miners who had come or whose families had come or ancestors had come in places like West Virginia and Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, they'd come because they sought opportunity. They saw opportunity in the coal mines and in the life of the coal camps. Those miners who had come now faced, the end of their industry as they had known it. They were being put out of work. And this is common not just to Appalachia, but it's common across America, even in the 1950s, and will continue into the 1960s and 70s. But high unemployment, the loss of jobs for those who stayed, essentially meant a debilitating poverty. It was this poverty that the news cameras of CBS and NBC and the reporters and the journalists who came to gawk and stare at this just poverty-ridden, seemingly backward people, children dressed in rags and running around barefooted, people who seemed hopeless and drawn and haggard and not American. They didn't seem to match up with the idea of the 50s, of glamour, of progress, of science. My point in all this is sometimes, even in the midst of affluence, you've got to remember it's not total. It wasn't just Appalachia, of course, where poverty was a daily reality of life for people. In California, migrant workers working under the hot sun in difficult conditions, bent over, backs, literally in pain, day after day, for minimal wages, living in conditions where violence was not uncommon, where their liberties, their capacity as human beings was restricted by their employers. What kind of existence is that in an affluent economy, an affluent world? All I'm suggesting here is it's worthwhile to consider the complexity of things. The image may not be all. And if those two examples aren't enough, let's consider the inner city, the growing inner cities of the United States. Inner cities that, like the mountains of Appalachia, were hemorrhaging jobs and hemorrhaging people. As whole populations abandoned the inner cities for the suburbs, leaving behind often those least able because of discrimination, but also because of perception, to compete and to maintain what existed. The 1960s and 70s, America's inner cities would become problems for the nation. But whatever the case, all along, this other America continued to exist. Not the America of plenty, but the America of poverty. I tell you this because I want to remind you that it's in the context of the times that the events of the civil rights movement happened. And it's somehow false, I think, to pull out the civil rights movement and treat it as a whole, in spite of the fact that it always happened within the context of its times. The events of the civil rights movement occurred within the context. But I also go back and talk about these other areas of America, of otherness, to suggest that the feelings were similar. The feelings were often the same. It was often African Americans, but not just African Americans, who functioned as the other in society, who struggled heartily to survive. And I also tell you this story and bring these other examples up to suggest the complexity of civil rights, that it's not just a simple story. It's not just Rosa Parks, and it's not just Martin Luther King Jr., and it's not just Montgomery, and it's not just Brown v. Board. It's individual acts, community acts, local acts, many acts of considerable bravery to challenge a system that had been built since the 19th century on violence and the threat of violence, on terror, no less. That's courage. It's not the only vision of courage, but it certainly is courage. And it's central to American history. Because the ultimate question, whether it's in Appalachia or whether it's a question of civil rights or the civil rights movement, is the question at the heart of American history. It's the question of what it means to be an American. What does it mean to have rights? Does it mean the same for everyone? Will it? Has it meant the same over time? Does it matter? I think it does. And if you'll recall, we started this class, this course, way back with Reconstruction. And if you think about it, we're asking the same questions. What would it mean for the freedmen to have rights? And here we are 100 years on, in the 1960s, still talking about rights. Not just for African Americans, but for Americans. It is an ongoing debate in this country because we claim to have these rights. And it's imperative in thinking about American history that we understand the past, we understand sort of what has happened, how the rights have evolved, how they've changed, how the images have changed, and also that we are knowledgeable enough to engage in the continuing debate over what that claim to have rights actually means. That's what this course is all about. It's not about memorizing, and it's not about looking up to heroes, and it's not about any of that. It's about becoming people capable of participating in the ongoing dialogue about what it means to be an American. And if we're not doing that, then you wonder what the purpose is at all. And so in this lecture, we talk about the civil rights movement, what has been called by historians the Second Reconstruction. And we'll pick up that story in just a minute.